The sky bled violet over Velmara's shattered horizon, its twin suns drooping like tired eyes behind a wasteland of skeletal spires and groaning metallic wreckage. The air smelled of scorched minerals and something far less poetic, the heavy musk of a predator on the hunt. Arasia crouched behind a half-melted support beam, her yellow hair tied back in a loose braid, long ears pressed tight against her skull. Her skin shimmered faintly, a natural reaction to the rising temperature as the beast drew closer. She tightened her grip on a blade so dull it would have struggled to offend a loaf of bread, let alone a 10-foot nightmare stitched together from the fever dreams of ancient Velmaran science. The ground vibrated beneath her, rhythmic, booming, a heartbeat from a god who had gotten bored and cruel. Arasia exhaled slowly. This was not how she had imagined her death. Sweaty, cornered in a derelict comms tower, armed with hope, a table knife, and exactly 2.5 insults that might confuse the monster into hesitation. She closed her eyes, one final act of defiance in the face of oblivion. Whatever would happen next, she would meet it with dignity. Across the wasteland, hidden behind a precariously balanced heap of debris, Ian McCrae squinted through the cracked lens of his scanner and muttered, "Well, that's definitely not a rescue party." The readings spiked. Biomass density off the charts, radiation levels flirting with, "Why not just grow a third arm already?" and seismic feedback suggesting a creature roughly the size and weight of a dropship. Ian adjusted the scanner, slapped it when it fizzed, and weighed his options. He could turn around, hike back to the safety of his crash pod, and eat 3 more days' worth of those horrifyingly orange protein bricks. Or, and this was the part of the plan that reeked of terrible ideas, he could run toward the thing currently making seismic art out of the landscape. The decision was made for him when the wind shifted, carrying a faint signal to his comms receiver. Static, broken words, and something unmistakably alive. A voice, and not just any voice. The clipped musical cadence of a Velmaran woman. "Oh, hell," Ian muttered, adjusting the battered plasma spear slung across his back. "Guess it's another Tuesday." He vaulted over the debris, boots crunching on the brittle, glassy surface of Velmara's ruins. The spear hummed to life, a sullen blue glow barely illuminating the swirling dust. As he ran, Ian's mind helpfully supplied a running commentary. "You're about to get eaten. Probably. Definitely. You, my friend, are the dictionary definition of bad choices." He skidded around a collapsed bulkhead and saw her. A woman crouched like a wounded falcon, head bowed, weapon ready, poised on the trembling edge of disaster. And between her and survival, a creature born of metal, flesh, and whatever happened when ethics took an extended coffee break. Ian didn't think. Thinking was a luxury he had abandoned somewhere around the second explosion of the day. He let out a whoop that was, technically speaking, more panic than strategy, and charge. The monster turned, a grotesque mass of chitin and cybernetic limbs, one eye glowing red, the other a pulsing array of sensory nodes that zeroed in on Ian with unsettling precision. "Hey, ugly!" Ian yelled, voice cracking slightly. "Over here! Come get your daily recommended serving of idiot!" The monster obliged with surprising enthusiasm. Araja's eyes snapped open just in time to see a human, barreling into the fray like a badly programmed rescue drone. His armor was a patchwork of mismatched plates, his helmet dented enough to qualify as modern art, and his weapon looked about 2 seconds from catastrophic failure. Yet somehow, through a combination of sheer momentum, luck, and what appeared to be the world's worst cartwheel, Ian managed to plant the spear's tip squarely into the creature's exposed underbelly. Plasma surged. The beast howled, flailing in a cacophony of screeching metal and burning sinew, before collapsing with a final, earth-shaking thud. Silence fell. Dust hung in the air like ghostly confetti. Ian staggered upright, wiped a trickle of blood from his eyebrow, and turned to Arasia with a crooked grin. "Hey there, you look like you could use a friend, or a much better weapon." Arasia blinked, stunned. Then despite herself, despite everything, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. The tower groaned ominously. Ian's grin faltered. "Okay, full disclosure, I'm not great at this heroic timing thing. So, maybe we run now," he suggested brightly. The ceiling answered by dropping a sizable chunk of debris where Ian had been standing a heartbeat earlier. He yelped, grabbing Araja's hand without waiting for permission and bolting through the crumbling wreckage. They stumbled into the open wasteland, panting, coughing, and laughing the kind of half-mad laughter that comes only after nearly becoming a meat pancake. Araja jerked her hand back and turned to him, speaking in careful, accented standard. "You are chaotic." "Thank you," Ian beamed. "I try." They stood there for a moment, two fugitives in a world gone mad, a human man and a Velmaran woman with stars in her hair and old sadness in her eyes. Araja studied him, his ragged armor, his easy grin, the spark of madness, or courage, though she wasn't sure yet, in his gaze. Trust was a dangerous thing, but so was loneliness. The ground rumbled again in the distance. Not a beast this time, but a storm rolling over the broken mountains, dark and electric. Ian followed her gaze inside. "Oh, great. Velmaran thunderstorms. $10 says the rain's acidic." Araja arched an elegant brow. "What is a bucks?" Ian opened his mouth, then closed it again. "It's a long story. Tell you over non-acidic beverages if we survive the next 10 minutes. For a heartbeat, the universe balanced on the knife edge between mistrust and necessity. Then Araja, with a shrug that was almost imperceptible, stepped closer, nodding once. A silent pact. "Right," Ian said, adjusting the plasma spear's ruined shaft. "First order of business, find shelter. Second order of business, explain sarcasm. Third order of business, not die." Araja tilted her head thoughtfully. "You are optimistic." "I prefer to think of it as delusionally confident," Ian quipped. Together they trudged toward the looming, broken hills, two mismatched figures silhouetted against the swirling, storm-torn sky. Velmara groaned and shifted beneath their feet, a world as wounded and stubborn as its newest, unlikeliest companions. The storm was coming fast, but so was something else, something harder to name. The first fragile threads of trust, spun thin but gleaming, between two lost souls, too stubborn to die, and too foolish, or too brave to walk alone. And somewhere, deep in the ancient guts of Velmara, forgotten things stirred, sensing change. The storm rolled in with a sullen grumble, as if the sky itself were contemplating whether to murder them outright or merely inconvenience them for a few miserable hours. Ian squinted upward as the first fat, sizzling raindrops splattered around them, each one leaving a smoldering pit in the cracked ground. "Acid rain," he said cheerfully. "Called it. Pay up." Araja gave him a sidelong look, unreadable. "I did not bet." "Well, now you owe me -$10. That's how gambling works where I'm from." Ian flashed her a grin. Araja's long ears twitched in faint disbelief, but she said nothing, pulling the ragged hood of her cloak over her head. The cloth hissed where the rain struck it, but held. Velmaran fabric, Ian thought, impressed. Probably something fancy, like nanoweave or self-repairing synth fiber, both of which were about 100 tax brackets above anything he owned. They hurried across the ruins, weaving through the skeletal remains of once great towers and toppled statues half buried in the ashen soil. In the near distance, a skeletal mass of structures rose. An old cargo station, by the look of it, hunched and brooding against the darkening horizon. Ian pointed toward it. "Shelter, unless it's haunted, in which case I'm totally okay with fighting ghosts. Add some variety." Araja followed without comment, her movements smooth and measured, like a dancer who had seen too many battles to waste energy on unnecessary motion. Inside the station was a cavernous maze of shattered shipping crates, collapsed scaffolding, and rusted machinery. The air was thick with the scent of old oil and something distinctly unwholesome, like a wet sock forgotten in a spacesuit for too long. Ian immediately tripped over a severed mechanical limb and landed face first in a pile of debris. He said eloquently from the floor. "I love what you've done with the place. Very post-apocalyptic chic." Araja regarded him for a long moment, then bent down and plucked a piece of rusted rebar from his backpack, tossing it aside with delicate disdain. "You are inconveniently fragile," she observed. "I prefer artistically breakable." Ian mumbled, levering himself upright. They found a relatively intact corner of the station, shielded from the worst of the storm. Arashia set about building a small camp with the ruthless efficiency of someone who had spent her whole life surviving places that wanted her dead. Ian tried to help by gathering bits of dry scrap, managing only to acquire several new cuts and the growing suspicion that Velmara itself was personally offended by his existence. Araja produced a small device from her belt, a palm-sized disc-shaped generator. She thumbed a control rune, and with a soft whum, a shimmering energy dome bloomed around them, crackling faintly as it repelled the acid rain. Ian whistled low. Now that's fancy tech. What do you call that? A don't-die bubble? Araja's lips quirked upward, just slightly. Personal Environmental Shield, Mark 7. Yeah, I'm sticking with don't die bubble. Rolls off the tongue better. They sat in the dim shelter of the dome, listening to the rain sizzle and steam against the barrier. For a long while there was only the storm and the rhythmic drip of water from the broken ceiling beams. Then Ian, fidgeting with a cracked power cell, ventured. So, are you going to tell me what you were doing out there all alone? Or is it one of those, I'd tell you, but then I'd have to kill you situations? Arasha stared into the distance, her face shadowed and still. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. I was searching for something lost, she said, or perhaps something that never truly existed. Ian scratched his head. Wow, cryptic. You could give fortune cookies a run for their money. She gave him a look, not hostile, but waited, as if deciding how much of herself she was willing to risk. Finally, she said, I was part of a research contingent. Before Velmara fell. Ian nodded slowly. He remembered the briefing files from before the mission, the ones he had mostly skimmed while eating instant noodles. Velmara had been a jewel once, a center of scientific achievement, home to civilizations who bent physics and biology like sculptors molding clay. Until something had gone terribly, spectacularly wrong. Experiments gone wild, Ian guessed. The usual, we thought we could play God, and it turns out God's job is harder than it looks routine. Araja's ears twitched again. Amusement, maybe, or regret. Yes, she said simply. The rain began to lighten, tapering into a misty drizzle that still hissed against the shield. Outside the cargo station, Velmara's ruins stretched endless and desolate, a graveyard under a bruised sky. Ian leaned back against a toppled crate and sighed. You know, when I signed up for this expedition, I was promised cutting-edge tech, good pay, and minimal exposure to lethal environments. I'm starting to think the brochure may have exaggerated a little. Arasia tilted her head. Brochure? You know, advertisement, lies printed on fancy paper. Ah, she said, propaganda. Exactly. Man, you're quick. There was a pause. Then to Ian's astonishment, Arasia laughed. A soft musical sound that seemed almost out of place in the broken station. Ian grinned. See? I'm growing on you already. Like a fungus, she said dryly. Exactly. Very hard to get rid of. The shield generator hummed softly as Ian closed his eyes, feeling exhaustion creep into his bones. Somewhere beyond the horizon, dangers stirred, storms brewed, and monsters no doubt plotted. But for now, in this tiny bubble of warmth and improbable companionship, things felt survivable. Maybe even a little better than that. Sleep tugged at him, heavy and insistent. Just before he drifted off, he heard Arasha's voice, quieter than before. Thank you. He cracked one eye open. For what? For being inconveniently fragile. Ian chuckled softly, the sound rumbling in his chest. Anytime, pointy ears. Anytime. Outside, Velmara slept uneasily, but inside the flickering dome, against all odds, hope, stubborn, ridiculous hope, curled itself into a fragile, precious thing between them. Morning on Velmara wasn't so much an event as a grudging surrender. The skies peeled themselves reluctantly from black to a sickly gray, and the twin suns clawed their way over the fractured horizon, like tired beasts too stubborn to quit. The storm had passed, leaving the world damp, steaming, and no less unfriendly than before. Ian awoke to find Arasha already standing at the edge of their little camp, her cloak billowing slightly in the sour breeze. She was scanning the landscape with a battered monocular device, her long ears twitching at every distant sound. "Rise and shine," Ian croaked from his spot on the ground, half buried under what he suspected was a deflated cargo tarp. He yawned, stretched, and immediately regretted both decisions as his spine popped like an old satellite dish in a windstorm. "Status report, soldier," he added, sitting up and attempting something like dignity. Aracia didn't turn. "We are not soldiers." "Hey, technicalities." Ian struggled free of the tarp, victorious but distinctly less majestic than he'd hoped. "Anything exciting? Breakfast delivery? Space mail?" "Movement. West Quadrant. 3 signatures. Heavy mass. Erratic trajectory." Ian blinked. "And that means?" Aracia lowered the monocular and looked at him gravely. "Either large scavenger beasts or very lost, very angry lawn equipment," Ian snorted. "I'm personally rooting for the lawn equipment. Less teeth." They broke camp quickly, Aracia expertly folding the shield generator back into its compact form, Ian stuffing debris into his backpack with the resigned air of a man who knew every gram would hurt later. He managed to jam his left thumb into a rusted vent plate and added another colorful word to his growing Velmara injury vocabulary. Together they moved through the cargo station's ruined hallways, sticking to the shadows where ancient beams and collapsed walls might offer some cover. The tension was thick but brittle, and Ian couldn't help but try to poke holes in it. "So, hypothetically," he said, keeping his voice low, "if the big scary things out there eat us, who do you think they'd find tastier? You or me?" Aracia glanced at him, utterly deadpan. "You. Humans are full of sugars and processed preservatives." Ian feigned defense. "Hey, I'll have you know I'm 90% organic. The other 10% is coffee and regret." She almost smiled. Almost. They edged their way toward a maintenance shaft leading out of the station, Ian going first because, as he put it, "I'm expendable and you're the mysterious, valuable one." He only partially meant it as a joke. As he ducked under a low beam, his boot caught on something. He looked down and froze. It was a drone, or what had once been a drone, a scouting model by the looks of it, designed for planetary surveys. Now it was little more than a twisted skeleton, its camera eyes shattered, its flight stabilizers clawed to ribbons. Ian knelt and brushed a layer of soot from the drone's chassis. Burned into the metal was a crude symbol, a circle split by jagged lines. Aracia," he called, voice tighter now. "Do your Velmaran bedtime stories ever mention creepy symbols carved into dead machines?" She crouched beside him, studying the mark with narrowed eyes. "That is not Velmaran." Her voice was a whisper, as if speaking louder might wake whatever had left the message. "Great. So good news. It's not your people."